family and friends are still working to process the death of this woman, Briana Johnson. Her body was found inside the trunk of a car after a high-speed chase that started in Chambers County and ended near downtown Beaumont over the weekend. This fella right here, Victor Campbell, was the driver. He's currently behind bars while authorities continue to sort through this investigation. And as 12 News reporter James Grant shares, this all started around Houston.
On the morning of November 28th, 2020, a Texas state trooper spots a black Honda speeding along Interstate 10. The driver refuses to stop. Blue lights flash in the rear view, but instead of slowing down, he presses harder on the gas. The pursuit stretches through Chambers County into Jefferson County, building toward a crash that will expose a secret no one could have imagined. When the car finally slams into a concrete barrier in Beaumont, officers move in, expecting to arrest a reckless driver. Instead, they open the trunk. Inside lies the body of a 28-year-old woman from Houston. Her name is Briana Johnson. She had been hidden, silent, and lifeless through the entire chase. She was not the one behind the wheel. She did not cause the chase, nor the crash. But her life had ended before either began. Was it love that turned dark? Was it jealousy? Or was it a plan, cold and deliberate, disguised as care?
Welcome to Twisted Crimes Files, where the darkest truths come to light. Stay with us for chilling stories you won't forget, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a case.
Briana Johnson was born in Houston, Texas, in 1992. She grew up in a city that could be both tender and unforgiving, a place where dreams had to be chased with determination, and where family could be both your anchor and your compass. She was the daughter, the niece, the cousin that people remembered for her smile. Not the kind of smile that faded the moment a camera was gone, but the one that stayed in her voice when she spoke. She had a laugh that seemed to roll out effortlessly, the kind that filled a room and made strangers feel like old friends. In her early 20s, Briana found her passion in beauty and makeup artistry. She had a talent for seeing what other people could become, whether it was a friend getting ready for a night out, or a client looking for the confidence that only comes from feeling seen. She built a small but loyal following online, sharing tutorials, product tips, and glimpses of her daily life. For her, makeup wasn't a mask. It was an art form. Friends described her as stylish without trying too hard, confident without arrogance. She carried herself like someone who knew her worth, and that's part of why people gravitated toward her. She was a graduate of Texas Southern University, proud of her education and proud of what it represented, especially for a young black woman navigating a competitive world. Briana loved animals, especially her small dog, who was never far from her side. She doted on her pet the way some people might a child, making sure it was well-fed, well-groomed, and always close to her. That dog was more than a companion. It was family. She was also deeply connected to her own family. Holidays were sacred. Birthdays were celebrated with intention. Her relatives recall that she never showed up empty-handed and never left without hugging everyone goodbye. But behind the carefully curated photos and lighthearted captions, there was a real woman living a real life. With its challenges, its complicated relationships, and its moments of doubt. She was like many of us, balancing the pursuit of her goals with the search for love and belonging. Her friends say she was generous with her time and attention. She was the type to listen without judgment, to stand up for the people she loved, and to offer help even when she was tired herself. But as much as she gave, she also trusted. Sometimes too much. Everyone loved her. Everyone, it seemed, except for one person. The man in question was not a stranger in Briana's life. His name was Victor Charles Campbell Jr., 35 years old, from Fresno, Texas. To the outside world, he was simply her boyfriend. To Briana, at least for a time, he was someone she trusted enough to welcome into her home, her routines, and her inner circle. In photographs, the two appeared close, leaning into each other at gatherings, sharing smiles and selfies, and standing side by side during outings. But the story behind those smiles was more complicated than any snapshot could reveal. Victor was older, with a history that most of Briana's friends didn't know in detail. He carried himself with a certain confidence, sometimes bordering on arrogance. He knew how to be charming when he wanted to be. That charm could be magnetic, even disarming, but it could also mask something darker. Briana's friends recall moments when she seemed happy with him. Dinners out, road trips, moments captured in short videos. Yet even within those moments, small cracks would sometimes show. A comment that felt a little too sharp. A look that lingered just a little too long when she was talking to someone else. A tone that shifted quickly from warm to cold if he felt overlooked. To those on the outside, it might have been easy to dismiss these things as normal relationship quirks. But the people who knew Briana best sometimes noticed changes in her behavior. She was at times more cautious about what she shared, less open about her day-to-day life. There were periods when she pulled back from friends, skipped gatherings, or avoided discussing her relationship in detail. Victor had a past, one that included prior convictions for assaulting a family member. Those incidents were years old, but they painted a picture of a man capable of violence behind closed doors. Whether Briana knew the full extent of that history is unclear. What is clear is that she chose to see the version of him he presented to her. They had moments of closeness, the kind that can make it hard to walk away, even when something feels off. It's the kind of closeness that can keep you tethered to someone who might not have your best interest at heart, because you remember the good days and hold onto the hope they'll return. To her family and friends, Victor was part of Briana's life. He was present enough to be known, but not always present enough to be truly understood. He was close enough to be trusted, and close enough to betray that trust completely. They were like partners, until one didn't come home. In the weeks before Briana's death, small moments began to take on new meaning. It's late October 2020. Friends remember seeing fewer social media posts from Briana. She had always been comfortable sharing glimpses of her life, her makeup artistry, her nights out, her time with family. But now, posts came less often. When they did, the captions were shorter, sometimes vague, and some friends say that in private messages, she seemed distracted. By early November, subtle changes became harder to ignore. One friend recalls that Briana canceled the dinner at the last minute, saying she didn't feel well. Later, that same night, she posted a short video at home. In the background, a man's voice could be heard, firm, almost impatient. She didn't mention who it was. The tension between Briana and Victor wasn't public. There were no online arguments, no obvious fights for the world to see. But for those who paid close attention, the energy shifted. She began removing old photos from her page, pictures of the two of them together, smiling at parties, celebrating birthdays. The deletions happened quietly, one by one. In mid-November, a friend noticed something else. At a small gathering, Briana seemed on edge when Victor was around. Her laughter was still there, but it felt forced, as if she was performing for the comfort of others rather than enjoying the moment. She stayed close to him, even in casual settings, as if distance might provoke a reaction. By the week of Thanksgiving, things escalated further. One source close to Briana says she mentioned wanting to spend more time with her family and less time at home. She didn't say why, but the timing is important because within days, everything would unravel. November 27th, the night before the chase. Surveillance footage would later show Victor entering and leaving Briana's apartment multiple times. Around midnight, another person, someone who knew Briana, entered the apartment. That person later told investigators the place smelled strongly of cleaning agents. Briana was nowhere to be found. In the early morning hours, around 4:55 a.m., cameras captured Victor backing Briana's black Honda close to the building. He opened the trunk. He lined it with a blanket. And then he lifted something heavy, something the footage could not fully reveal before closing it. By sunrise, the tension that had been building for weeks reached its breaking point. And by the end of that day, Briana would no longer be alive. No one knew that the smiling brunch photo from weeks before would be her last. The day that would become Briana Tyra Johnson's last began without any public warning signs. It was Friday, November 27th, 2020, the day after Thanksgiving. Across Houston, families were still picking through leftovers. Some were returning home from long drives. Others were lining up for Black Friday sales. The air was crisp, hovering in the mid-50s, and the sky carried that pale winter light that makes the morning feel slower than it is. In her Sunnyside neighborhood, a small, tightly knit community southeast of downtown, the streets were calm. Maggie Street, where Briana lived, was lined with modest apartment complexes, the kind where people knew each other by face, if not by name. Inside one of those buildings, Briana's apartment was a reflection of her personality. Organized, warm, with small details that made it unmistakably hers. A few framed photographs on the wall, family gatherings, nights out with friends. Shelves with makeup palettes arranged in neat rows. A little dog bed in the corner for her beloved pet. That morning, there's no clear record of what time Briana woke up or whether she had plans to go anywhere. Friends say she had talked about wanting a quiet weekend after the Thanksgiving rush. She'd been working on new ideas for her beauty content, maybe even experimenting with a holiday look for her followers. But what we do know is this. Her phone activity was routine early in the day. A few messages, a couple of app notifications. Nothing alarming. Nothing to suggest that before the sun rose again, she would be gone. As the day wore on, things shifted. By early evening, her responses became slower. Friends who texted her noticed delays. A call from one person reportedly went unanswered. It was unusual, but not so unusual that anyone panicked. That night, the only constant presence was Victor Charles Campbell Jr., her boyfriend. Surveillance footage and later police statements would confirm that he was in and out of her apartment multiple times. The exact conversations between them in those hours are known only to him and to Briana in her final moments. Around midnight, a visitor arrived at the apartment. This person would later become a critical witness in piecing together the final timeline. They recalled stepping inside and immediately noticing the smell, a strong, unmistakable chemical scent like bleach. The smell was so sharp that it overpowered everything else. Briana was nowhere to be seen. There was no sign of her sitting in the living room, no movement from her bedroom. The visit was brief. Within minutes, the person left. At some point between that midnight visit and dawn, investigators believe Briana was killed. Just before 5 a.m., security cameras outside the building captured a scene that would haunt detectives. Victor pulled Briana's black Honda into the rear parking area, the trunk angled toward the building. He opened it and reached inside. From somewhere, possibly the apartment, he brought out a blanket and carefully lined the interior of the trunk. Then, bending forward, he appeared to lift something heavy. The footage was too grainy to show exactly what it was, but investigators would later conclude that it was Briana's body. Once the trunk was closed, Victor didn't rush. He moved with the kind of measured calm that suggests planning, not panic. Before leaving, he reached up and covered one of the nearby surveillance cameras with a piece of cloth, a small but deliberate act to obscure part of his movements. Moments later, he got in the driver's seat and pulled away, the Honda disappearing into the early morning darkness. From that moment, Briana's final journey was not her own. She could no longer speak, no longer see where she was being taken. Her body lay hidden in the trunk, carried along the highway toward a fate she could neither escape nor change. Dawn broke over Houston that morning like it always did, casting golden light over the city skyline, warming the brick buildings, stirring the streets back to life. But for Briana, the day had already ended. Hours later, long after she had been driven away from Maggie Street, her body would be discovered in Beaumont, inside the same trunk Victor had prepared before sunrise. And though her life was stolen from her in the early hours of that morning, a final act of generosity would follow. Briana's organs would be donated, giving strangers, people she had never met, the chance to live. Even in death, she was giving. Even in loss, she was saving. She had been a light in so many people's lives. And now, her absence would become a darkness that her family and friends would never fully emerge from. It was just after sunrise on Saturday, November 28th, 2020, when a Texas Department of Public Safety trooper noticed the black Honda traveling eastbound on Interstate 10. The car wasn't simply moving, it was weaving. crossing lanes without signaling. The speed crept higher, faster than the flow of traffic. The driver's movements were erratic enough to raise suspicion that something was wrong. Perhaps a driver under the influence, perhaps someone running from something else entirely. When the trooper activated his lights near FM 365 in Jefferson County, the expectation was that the car would pull over. It didn't. Instead, the brake lights flashed once, briefly, as though there had been a moment of decision. Then the Honda accelerated. The pursuit began. For miles, the chase pushed eastbound toward Beaumont. The patrol car's siren cut through the early morning air, echoing across the concrete overpasses and the flat Texas landscape. Other drivers pulled to the side as the two vehicles flew past, one chasing, one fleeing, neither slowing. Inside that trunk was Briana Johnson, lifeless, hidden, carried toward the last place she would ever be seen. Victor Campbell didn't stop at the first opportunity. He didn't slow to reconsider. He pushed the car harder, as though speed itself could erase what had already been done hours before. The tires gripped the road as the chase entered the city limits of Beaumont. Traffic was light, but intersections, overpasses, and merging lanes made every second more dangerous. At mile marker 855, it ended. The Honda collided with a concrete barrier, the impact loud enough to draw the attention of nearby residents and drivers. The front end crumpled, steam hissing from the damaged engine. The patrol car pulled up seconds later, the trooper stepping out with the urgency that comes from training and instinct. Officers approached, expecting to deal with a reckless driver, perhaps someone intoxicated or wanted for another crime. Victor was removed from the driver's seat and detained. His speech was slurred, his demeanor unsteady. But it was what came next that shifted this from a traffic stop into something far darker. As part of the post-pursuit protocol, officers began inspecting the car. When they reached the rear, they noticed the trunk was shut tight. No reason at first to think anything of it. But something about the scene made them check. When the trunk lid lifted, the reality struck like a blow. Inside was the body of a young woman. She was positioned carefully, wrapped partially in a blanket, the same blanket later identified from the surveillance footage at her apartment. Her skin was pale. Her hair, once styled with the precision she was known for, was now tangled, flattened from the hours in confinement. There was no movement, no breath, no sign of life. It was Briana Johnson. The sirens that had been chasing a fleeing driver now became the background to a crime scene. The air shifted from adrenaline to something heavier. The weight of a life cut short. The silence that follows the moment of confirmation that nothing can be undone. Victor Campbell was taken into custody immediately. The charges in that moment were only the beginning: evading arrest, driving while intoxicated, tampering with evidence, abuse of corpse. Murder would be added soon after. For the officers at the scene, the image of that trunk would not fade quickly. They had been trained to expect many things during a pursuit, but not this. Not a victim, hidden away, carried across counties at high speed, as though she were nothing more than a piece of evidence to be disposed of. And yet, here she was, 28 years old, gone. The crash was over. The chase was over. But the real investigation was only beginning. From the moment the black Honda came to rest against that concrete barrier, Victor Charles Campbell Jr. began shaping his own narrative. To the officers on scene, his behavior was off. Not the panic confusion of a driver in shock from a crash. Not the urgency of someone desperate to explain a tragic accident. What they saw instead was a man who seemed more irritated than alarmed. He spoke slowly, slurring his words. At times, his answers drifted off mid-sentence, as though he had lost his train of thought, or perhaps was calculating what he should and should not say. When questioned about the chase, he gave no clear explanation for why he had refused to stop. No mention of fear for his own safety. No admission of a mistake. Just vague statements that failed to match the urgency of the situation. Officers noticed the smell of alcohol on his breath, the glaze in his eyes. But the physical signs of intoxication didn't fully account for his demeanor. It wasn't just that he was impaired. It was that he seemed unconcerned about what had just been found in his car. Think about that. You just crashed at high speed. Police have pulled you out of the driver's seat. They've opened your trunk and found a woman's body, someone you knew, someone you'd been seen with countless times. And yet, there's no visible shock, no visible grief. No, what happened? Or is she okay? Instead, his focus appeared to be on himself, on the immediate reality of being in custody, not on the finality of what was in that trunk. During initial processing, Victor didn't volunteer details. He didn't ask questions about Briana's condition. And when the subject of the chase came up, he offered explanations that contradicted what was already known from surveillance, from eyewitness accounts, and from the patrol car's dash camera. Investigators would later say that in those first hours, his story shifted. In one version, he claimed he had been trying to take Briana somewhere. In another, he implied she had been that way, lifeless, before he got into the car. The timelines never matched. The sequence of events he described didn't align with the physical evidence. Even the smallest details of his behavior stood out. In the moments after the crash, as officers moved around the scene, he kept glancing toward the Honda, not in the way a man looks at a destroyed car he's still making payments on, but in the way someone looks to see if anything else has been found. And then there was the blanket. Investigators knew from the apartment security footage that this was no random piece of fabric. It had been placed in the trunk hours earlier, before anything else was loaded into it. This wasn't a hasty decision made in the panic of the moment. It was preparation. That blanket told its own story, a deliberate attempt to conceal, to contain, to control the narrative before it ever reached the public. Victor's body language during questioning only added to investigators' suspicions. Leaning back in his chair, avoiding direct eye contact, tapping his foot in a slow, repetitive rhythm. At one point, he asked for water, not unusual, but when it arrived, he barely touched it. The request had been more about stalling than about thirst. For law enforcement, all of this mattered. In homicide investigations, what a suspect does immediately after a death can speak volumes about motive, about intent, and about the line between an accident and an act of calculated violence. If this had truly been an accident, why not stop? Why not call for help? Why cover a camera before leaving the apartment? Why prepare a trunk? Why drive more than an hour with the body of someone you claim to care about, past hospitals, past police stations, without ever seeking assistance? Every choice Victor made after Briana's death, from the camera cover to the high-speed flight toward Beaumont, reinforced one chilling possibility in the minds of investigators. This was not panic. This was control. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives from Houston and Beaumont coordinated with the Texas Rangers to close the gap between Briana's apartment and the crash site. From the apartment complex, they retrieved hours of surveillance footage, every frame from the night of November 27th into the morning of the 28th. It showed Victor's movements in and out of the building, the placement of the blanket in the trunk, and his deliberate covering of the camera before driving away. Inside Briana's apartment, crime scene technicians documented the smell of bleach still hanging in the air. Cleaning supplies were found near the bathroom and in the kitchen. There were no signs of forced entry, indicating the person who killed her had been inside with her consent. Forensic testing would later reveal no gunshot wounds, no stab marks. The Harris County Medical Examiner determined the cause of death: manual strangulation. Phone records placed Victor's device in the vicinity of Briana's apartment during the critical hours before her disappearance, then tracking eastbound on Interstate 10 in the same time frame as the pursuit. The car itself was processed for evidence. Fibers from the blanket matched those in the apartment. Trace evidence, including strands of Briana's hair, confirmed she had been in the trunk long before the crash. The timeline was set. The physical evidence, digital data, and surveillance all pointed to one person. Within days, Victor Campbell was formally charged with murder. The initial charges from the crash, evading arrest, driving while intoxicated, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, remained in place. At his first court appearance, his bond for the murder charge was set at $300,000. Combined with the other charges, his total bond exceeded $1 million. Court documents revealed prior convictions for assaulting a family member, 2 felonies and 1 misdemeanor, spanning more than a decade. Those convictions painted a picture of a man with a history of violence toward those close to him. The courtroom proceedings were slow to start. COVID-19 restrictions in late 2020 delayed hearings, and public updates became scarce. For Briana's family, the lack of movement in the case felt like a second injustice. The charges were in place, but the trial that might bring answers remained out of reach. Months after Briana's death, her social media accounts remained online. Old posts, untouched since before the killing, became places for friends and strangers to leave messages, grief, outrage, prayers. Then came something that unsettled many. Victor's account still showed old photos of the two of them together. They had not been deleted. In some, Briana's smile lit the frame. In others, his arm was around her. Even after his arrest, even after the murder charge, those images remained. To some, it was nothing more than digital residue. To others, it felt like an open wound, proof that the past could sit there, frozen, while the future had been stolen. For Briana's family, there was no comfort in those pictures. For them, the only truth that mattered was this. She was gone, and the man accused of taking her life had once been close enough to hold her, close enough to be trusted. In the weeks after Briana's death, her family leaned on faith to get through what they could not understand. At her memorial, a pastor spoke words that carried both grief and challenge. We are not here to make sense of evil. We are here to keep the light of those we've lost burning in the dark. Briana had believed in kindness, in loyalty, in the value of loving without hesitation. Her friends remembered her generosity, the way she made space for others, the way she celebrated their wins as if they were her own. For some, the idea of forgiveness felt impossible. For others, it was the only way forward. But all agreed on one truth. The person responsible for her death had taken more than just a life. He had stolen futures, birthdays, holidays, and the everyday moments that make a family whole. Looking back, the warning signs were there. The controlling glances, the sudden isolation from friends, the moments that didn't feel quite right but were brushed aside. It's easy to believe we would notice if someone we loved were in danger. But danger rarely walks in wearing a mask. Sometimes it's in a familiar smile. Sometimes it's in the arm wrapped around your shoulder. Briana's story is not just about a single act of violence. It's about the quiet erosion of safety that can happen in a relationship when love is used as a weapon. We saw their laughs and photos. We didn't see the silences that followed behind closed doors. Love should never come with fear. Friendship should never end in betrayal. Briana Johnson was 28 years old. She had dreams, she had people who loved her, and she had a future that should have been hers. Her story is a reminder. Be careful who you trust. Not every smile is safe. What do you think happened that night? Was it jealousy, cold calculation, or something even darker? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you or someone you know feels unsafe, reach out. Don't wait. Sometimes, the danger is closer than you think. Rest in peace, Briana.